What if I told you that everything you think you know about Cleopatra is wrong? That her legendary beauty was actually the least interesting thing about her? Tonight, we're going behind the palace walls to discover the real woman who seduced two Roman emperors, not with her looks, but with something far more dangerous, something that would make even today's power players blush. So settle in, because this story might change how you see power forever. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop. Tonight, we're traveling back through time together to ancient Egypt, to a world of intrigue and calculated passion. If you're enjoying this journey through history's most fascinating love stories, consider subscribing. That helps more people find these quiet moments of wonder. Now, close your eyes and let yourself drift back 21 centuries to a palace built from golden stone and ambitious dreams. Chapter 1: A Palace of Shadows and Sand. The sun hangs low over Alexandria, painting the palace walls the color of burnished copper. This isn't Rome's cold marble, this is Egypt, sandstone blocks, each one weighing more than a horse, fitted so perfectly you couldn't slide a papyrus scroll between them. The smell of frankincense drifts through corridors where the most powerful woman in the world is about to make her first move. She's 18, and already they call her Pharaoh. But Cleopatra isn't what you'd expect from Hollywood's golden goddess. She's small, sharp-featured, her nose a bit too prominent by Roman standards. Yet when she speaks, the room changes. Her voice carries the weight of 3,000 years of Egyptian kings, and she speaks 9 languages fluently. That matters more than beauty ever could in a world built on words and treaties. The palace halls stretch endlessly, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows against hieroglyphic walls. Each symbol tells a story of gods and mortals, of power passed down through bloodlines older than most civilizations. Servants pad silently across floors inlaid with lapis lazuli, their sandals whispering secrets. This is where Cleopatra learned that knowledge is the sharpest weapon and that desire can topple empires. In her private study, scrolls pile like snowdrifts, mathematics from Babylon, poetry from Athens, military strategy from Sparta. She reads by candlelight until her eyes burn, because tomorrow she'll face Roman senators who think Egyptian queens are ornamental. They're wrong, dangerously wrong. She's memorizing their weaknesses, their wives' names, their secret debts, intelligence gathering disguised as casual conversation over wine. The palace gardens bloom with night flowering jasmine. Here, Cleopatra walks barefoot on grass wet with dew, planning her survival. Egypt is rich. Grain flows down the Nile like liquid gold. But Rome is hungry, always hungry, for wheat, for land, for tribute. She knows they'll come for her kingdom eventually. The question isn't if, but when, and how she'll turn their own desires against them. She practices her Latin accent in the mirror, smoothing rough Egyptian edges until she sounds like nobility from the 7 hills. Romans respect only strength and sophistication. Fine, she'll give them both, wrapped in Egyptian mystery they can't quite understand. Her tutors taught her this: never let them see everything you are. Keep something in reserve, something that makes them lean closer, wanting more. The throne room echoes with whispered conversations. Courtiers debate grain shipments and tax collections, but Cleopatra hears the subtext: fear. Rome's shadow grows longer each year. Her advisors suggest marriage alliances, political compromises. She listens, nods, says nothing. Inside, she's already 3 moves ahead. If Rome wants Egypt, they'll have to go through her, and she's planning to make that complicated. Fashion here isn't vanity, it's warfare. Every gold bracelet, every kohl-rimmed eye, every perfectly pleated linen dress sends a message. I am Egypt. I am wealth personified. I am worth your attention. Cleopatra understands this instinctively. When Roman envoys arrive, they expect barbarian splendor, something primitive they can dismiss. Instead, they find elegance that makes their own clothing look crude by comparison. The royal barge waits at the palace dock, painted in blue and gold like a floating temple. Soon she'll use it to make an entrance that will echo through history. But tonight, it's just a reminder of journeys yet to come, of rivers she'll cross and men she'll meet, of choices that will either save Egypt or watch it burn. The current whispers against the hull, restless, like her ambitions. Love, in her world, isn't about romance. It's about alliance, bloodlines, treaties written in shared glances, and whispered promises. Her ancestors married siblings to keep power concentrated. She'll do something far more dangerous. She'll marry Rome itself. Not officially, perhaps, but in ways that matter more than ceremony, through desire, through need, through making herself absolutely indispensable. The palace kitchens work through the night, preparing feasts that could feed small cities, peacocks stuffed with figs, honey cakes shaped like lotus flowers, wine aged in amphoras sealed when her great-grandmother ruled. Hospitality is statecraft here. Make your guests comfortable, overwhelmed by luxury, slightly drunk on beauty. Then, when their guard is down, negotiations begin in earnest. Her bedroom overlooks the harbor where merchant ships arrive daily. Silk from India, spices from Arabia, ivory from the south. Egypt sits at the crossroads of three continents, and wealth flows through Alexandria like blood through veins. This is what Rome really wants, not just her kingdom, but the golden river of commerce that makes her people rich and powerful. The priests whisper that she's the reincarnation of Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood. She lets them whisper. Divine authority helps when you're 18 and surrounded by men who've forgotten more about politics than you've had time to learn. But divinity alone won't save Egypt. For that, she'll need something more dangerous than godhood. She'll need to make Romans fall in love with her. As midnight approaches, the palace settles into restless quiet. Guards pace battlements under stars that watch the pyramids rise. Somewhere in Rome, senators debate Egyptian policy over wine and olives. They don't know it yet, but their fate is already being decided. Here, in chambers scented with lotus and myrrh, by a young queen who understands that sometimes the heart is the most direct path to power. The bronze lamps cast shadows that dance against silk-draped walls, each flame carefully positioned to soften her features. Just so, Cleopatra understood something most rulers never grasped, that power lived not just in armies or gold, but in the space between heartbeats, in the pause before someone speaks. Her private chambers weren't just rooms, they were theaters where empires rose and fell on the strength of a glance. The indigo linens came from traders who crossed deserts for months to reach Alexandria. She chose these colors deliberately deep blues that made her skin seem to glow like marble in moonlight. Every detail calculated. The placement of cushions, the temperature of wine, even the way light filtered through translucent curtains. Nothing in Cleopatra's world happened by accident, especially not love. Rare lilies floated in alabaster bowls throughout her chambers, their scent so intoxicating that visitors would remember it years later, long after treaties were signed or broken. She understood that memory lived in the senses, A particular fragrance could make a Roman general recall not just her words, but how his pulse quickened when she spoke them. Desire, she knew, was Egypt's most valuable export. Here, behind walls thick enough to muffle secrets, she practiced the delicate art of calculated intimacy. Watch how she tilted her head when Julius Caesar spoke of Rome's troubles, just enough to show interest, never enough to seem desperate. Every gesture measured, every silence strategic. She wasn't performing seduction, she was conducting a symphony where hearts were instruments and kingdoms were the stakes. The warm oil in those bronze lamps burned for hours, long enough for conversations that would reshape the Mediterranean world. She'd learned something her father never understood, that vulnerability, carefully deployed, was more powerful than any weapon. A confession shared over wine, a tear shed at precisely the right moment. These weren't weaknesses, they were Egypt's secret arsenal. In these intimate spaces, she revealed just enough of herself to make powerful men believe they were seeing her true heart. A childhood memory shared as dawn crept through the windows, a fear whispered against a lover's shoulder, but even her genuine moments were chosen with surgical precision. The question that haunted her enemies, where did strategy end and authentic feeling begin? She understood that Romans, for all their discipline, were romantics at heart. They wanted to believe they were loved for themselves, not their legions. So she gave Caesar poetry written in his honor, gave Antony victory celebrations that felt like personal tributes. Each man left her chambers, convinced he was different, special, the one who had truly captured the heart of Egypt. The cushions were arranged to encourage closeness without seeming deliberate. Conversations flowed like the wine, casual topics that gradually turned toward Egypt's needs, Rome's policies, the delicate balance of power between two worlds. She never demanded outright. Instead, she planted seeds of thought that would bloom later in Senate chambers when decisions were made. Her servants moved through these rooms like ghosts, appearing with refreshments, disappearing before intimate words were spoken. But she trained them to listen, to remember. Information gathered in bedchambers often proved more valuable than intelligence from spies. A sleepy confession about troop movements, concerns about rival senators. Pillow talk was Egypt's intelligence network. She kept letters in a cedar box by her bed, correspondence that would seem romantic to casual eyes, but contained coded discussions of grain shipments, trade routes, and military alliances. Love and politics intertwined so completely that separating them became impossible. Was she protecting Egypt through seduction or seducing Rome through patriotism? Perhaps even she couldn't say for certain. The mirrors in her chambers were positioned to catch light from multiple angles, ensuring she always appeared radiant, no matter the hour. But they also let her watch her visitors' faces when they thought themselves unobserved. She studied micro-expressions like scholars studied texts. A tightened jaw meant resistance, dilated pupils suggested attraction. Knowledge was power, and power was survival. In winter months, braziers filled these rooms with warmth that made Rome's cold marble palaces seem harsh by comparison. She offered comfort that went deeper than physical pleasure, the feeling of being understood, appreciated, seen. Romans lived such public lives. Here they could drop their masks. The irony, of course, was that removing their masks only made them more visible to her calculating eyes. She choreographed even her most spontaneous moments, the way she'd run fingers through Caesar's graying hair, as if forgetting he was a conqueror, how she'd curl against Antony's chest during thunderstorms, pretending storm sounds frightened her. These gestures weren't false, they were true emotions deployed at strategic moments. Authenticity weaponized for Egypt's survival. The silk hangings around her bed muffled not just sound, but the harsh edges of political reality. Within this cocoon, she could make Roman generals forget they were conquerors and remember they were men who longed to be loved. She gave them what their wives, bound by Roman custom, could not: intellectual partnership wrapped in sensual promise. Her private chambers witnessed moments of genuine tenderness alongside calculated seduction. The line between strategy and authentic feeling blurred until perhaps not even she could locate it. Did she truly love these powerful men, or had she simply convinced herself that survival and affection could coexist? The question lingered in those lamplit rooms like incense smoke. As shadows lengthen and flames burn lower, we begin to see the cost of such calculated intimacy. Each relationship demanded pieces of her authentic self, traded for Egypt's continued independence. Tomorrow will witness how these carefully cultivated affections would face their greatest test when personal desire clashed with political necessity and the consequences that followed. Picture Alexandria in 48 BC, the marble gleaming white against the Mediterranean, but inside the palace walls, everything is crumbling. Cleopatra is 21, exiled by her brother, watching her kingdom slip away like sand through fingers. Then Julius Caesar arrives, 52 years old, battle scarred, ruler of half the world. What happens next isn't just romance, it's the opening move in the most dangerous chess game in ancient history. Two minds that understand power about to collide. Caesar expects another Eastern queen begging for his favor. Instead, servants unroll a carpet at his feet, and out steps Cleopatra. Not cowering, not pleading, she rises slowly, gold catching the lamplight, meeting his eyes without flinching. The room falls silent. Caesar has conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, but in this moment, he's the one caught off guard. She's counted on this. The shock, the audacity, the sheer theater of power, wrapped in silk and ambition. That first night, they talk until dawn breaks over the harbor. Not pleasantry, strategy. Caesar speaks of Rome's endless hunger for grain, for gold. Cleopatra counters with Egypt's position as the crossroads of three continents. Their words dance around each other, testing, probing. She serves wine from goblets older than his republic. He describes battles where thousands died for his ambition. Neither mentions the obvious, how perfectly their needs align, how dangerous this could become. The palace servants whisper about the Roman who stays past midnight, the queen who cancels morning audiences. But their secret meetings aren't happening in bedchambers. They're on the royal barge, drifting down the Nile under star-filled skies. Here, away from spies and senators, they shed their public masks. Caesar admits Rome exhausts him sometimes. Cleopatra confesses her fear that Egypt will become just another province. The water laps against the hull, intimate confessions in the darkness. Caesar has bedded queens before, but Cleopatra is different. She doesn't giggle or flutter her eyelashes. When he describes his military campaigns, she asks about supply lines, about how he keeps loyalty among troops who haven't been paid in months. Her questions are sharp, strategic. She's studying him the way a general studies a battlefield. He realizes with something close to delight that she's dangerous, not to his body, to his mind. Finally, an equal. The moonlight turns the Nile silver, and their conversations grow bolder. Cleopatra traces Egyptian hieroglyphs in the condensation on her wine cup, explaining how her ancestors ruled when Rome was still mud huts. Caesar counters with stories of Germanic tribes he's crushed, of senators who tremble at his name. It's verbal sparring, each testing the other's limits. But when their hands brush reaching for the same scroll, neither pulls away. The political is becoming personal, exactly as she planned. Their affair scandalizes Rome, but that's not what worries Caesar's advisors. It's how she changes his decision making. Before Cleopatra, Caesar struck fast, decisively. Now he lingers in Alexandria, asking her opinion on matters of state. She suggests subtle policy changes that benefit Egypt while seeming to serve Roman interests. His generals watch nervously as their commander, history's greatest military mind, starts thinking like a pharaoh. The conquest has reversed itself. She's conquering him. Late one night, as incense burns in bronze braziers and wine flows like honey, Caesar asks the question that's been haunting him, whether she truly cares for him or if this is all political theater. Cleopatra sets down her cup, studying his weathered face in the flickering light. Her answer cuts like a blade. Does it matter which, if the result serves us both? The honesty is brutal, beautiful. He laughs a sound like distant thunder. She's admitted the game, and somehow that makes it more real. But danger shadows their midnight rendezvous. Caesar's enemies in Rome whisper about the Eastern witch who's bewitched their general. Egyptian nobles mutter about their queen debasing herself with a Roman barbarian. Assassins move in both directions, Roman daggers and Egyptian poison. Each stolen hour together increases the risk, yet they continue meeting by the water, talking until the sky lightens, as if their words could hold back the dawn and all the deadly politics it brings. The mathematical precision of her seduction becomes clear when you map their relationship against Egypt's grain harvests, Rome's military campaigns, the movement of gold through ancient trade routes. Every intimate dinner corresponds with a strategic advantage. Every night they spend together shifts the balance of Mediterranean power. Cleopatra isn't just sleeping with Caesar, she's negotiating with her body as currency, her intellect as leverage. It's brilliant, ruthless, and it's working exactly as she designed it. Caesar's letters home grow shorter, more cryptic. He stops mentioning when he plans to leave Egypt. His soldiers grow restless in their Alexandria barracks, but their general seems lost in conversations about philosophy, about the ancient mysteries of the Nile. Cleopatra has done something no Germanic chief or Gallic warrior could manage. She's made Rome's greatest general forget his timetable. Time moves differently in her presence, slower, more dangerous, more completely under her control. The stakes become life and death when word arrives that Pompey has been murdered on an Egyptian beach, killed by men trying to curry favor with Caesar. But the plan backfires. Caesar weeps for his old enemy, disgusted by such crude politics. Cleopatra seizes the moment, offering him comfort, positioning herself as different, refined, honorable. While others traffic in blood, she offers conversation, wine, the gentle lapping of water against marble. Her timing is perfect, her understanding of his psychology, flawless. 9 months later, their son is born, Caesarion, Little Caesar. The baby's existence makes their alliance tangible, dangerous in new ways. Caesar's wife Calpurnia rages in Rome. Egyptian priests wonder if their queen has produced the next pharaoh or sold their kingdom to foreigners. But holding the child, watching Caesar's scarred hands cradle tiny fingers, Cleopatra knows she's created something beyond politics. She's given Caesar immortality, and herself insurance. blood ties Rome can't easily sever. Their final night together, Caesar speaks of bringing her to Rome, of making her his recognized queen. The fantasy shimmers between them like heat over sand. Beautiful, impossible. They both know the Senate would revolt, that Roman citizens would never accept an Eastern ruler. But in the darkness, with the Nile flowing eternal beside them, they let themselves imagine a world where love and power could coexist, where she could rule beside him. The dream tastes like honey wine and feels like heartbreak. When Caesar's ships finally disappear over the Mediterranean horizon, Cleopatra stands on her palace balcony, calculating what she's won. Egypt is secure, Rome's protection assured, her throne unshakable. Her gamble with intimacy has paid dividends beyond imagination. But there's something else, something she didn't plan for. The hollow feeling in her chest when his laughter no longer echoes through palace halls. She's mastered the art of weaponizing desire, but the weapon has cut her too. This is how Cleopatra operates, every kiss calculated, every caress carrying political weight. Her bedroom becomes a war room, where bodies are borders and pleasure is policy. Caesar was her opening act, her proof of concept. She's learned she can make the world's most powerful men forget their empires when they're lost in her presence. But Caesar won't be her last Roman. History's most ambitious woman is just getting started. The stage is set for an even grander performance. Alexandria, 48 BC. The most powerful man in Rome meets the woman who would reshape history. Caesar arrives expecting tribute, instead finds Cleopatra wrapped in linen, smuggled past his guards like precious cargo. But here's what the scrolls don't tell you. When she unrolls herself before him, speaking perfect Latin, quoting Greek philosophy, discussing Egyptian mathematics, Caesar doesn't see a conquest, he sees an equal. Something shifts in that marble-floored room. The empire suddenly has two minds, thinking as one. Their first conversation lasts until dawn. Palace servants find them still talking, scrolls scattered everywhere, wine cups forgotten. Cleopatra speaks 9 languages. Caesar has conquered Gaul. She understands crop rotation and taxation. He knows military strategy and Roman law. Together, they sketch out maps of the known world, then imagine what lies beyond. This isn't romance yet, it's recognition. Two brilliant minds finally finding someone who can keep up with the conversation. Picture Caesar, 52 years old, exhausted from decades of war and politics. Picture Cleopatra, 21, carrying the weight of a 300-year dynasty on her shoulders. Both understand power in ways their courtiers never will. Both know what it costs. When they look at each other across that room in Alexandria, they see someone who gets it. The loneliness of command, the burden of always being the smartest person in the room until now. Their alliance begins with grain shipments. Egypt feeds Rome, Rome protects Egypt. Simple trade agreements that reshape the Mediterranean, but watch their hands as they negotiate. Caesar traces trade routes on maps, while Cleopatra calculates tonnage in her head. She knows Egypt's harvest yields better than her own scribes. He understands Roman appetites better than his senators. They're not just making deals, they're architecting the future, two empires becoming one organism. The Nile cruise happens 3 months later, 17 days floating between Dendera and Edfu, past temples older than Rome itself. Caesar studies Egyptian engineering, those massive stone blocks fitted without mortar. Cleopatra explains hieroglyphs that tell stories of pharaohs who built monuments to last forever. They're both thinking the same thing. What legacy will we leave? What will people remember? The questions that haunt everyone who holds ultimate power. By winter, they're finishing each other's sentences. Not romance, something deeper. Shared vision. Caesar sees Egypt's wealth feeding Roman expansion into Britain, into Germania. Cleopatra sees Roman engineering bringing water to Egyptian deserts. They spend evenings redesigning aqueduct systems, planning new cities, imagining libraries that would make Alexandria look small. Two brilliant minds discovering they can think bigger together than either could alone. The empire suddenly has infinite possibilities. History wants simple stories, star-crossed lovers or political masterminds. But Caesar and Cleopatra resist categories. She sits in on military briefings, suggesting cavalry formations Caesar hasn't considered. He joins her in the palace scriptorium, helping translate Persian texts into Latin. They argue about philosophy over dinner, agree about taxation policy after midnight. Their relationship lives in the space between personal and political, a space most people can't even perceive. Watch them at state banquets. Caesar defers to her knowledge of Eastern trade routes. Cleopatra asks his opinion on Germanic tribal politics. They've become each other's closest advisor, best student, worthiest opponent. When she challenges his strategy, he listens. When he questions her methods, she explains. This isn't romance disguised as politics or politics disguised as romance. It's partnership between equals who happen to find each other fascinating. Their son Caesarion arrives in summer, 47 BC, a child born to reshape the world. Caesar holds him for the first time in the palace gardens, Cleopatra watching from the shade of fig trees. They don't discuss marriage, too complicated, too many other wives, other kingdoms to consider. But they both understand what this means. The future of two empires wrapped in linen blankets, sleeping peacefully in the Alexandria heat. Rome grows suspicious. Letters arrive daily from the Senate, questioning Caesar's extended stay in Egypt. Why so many months away from Roman business? Why these new trade agreements favoring Alexandria? Caesar reads them aloud to Cleopatra, both of them laughing at the paranoia. But underneath the laughter, tension. Rome doesn't share power easily, and Caesar has been sharing quite a lot. The senators are starting to notice their emperor thinking like a pharaoh. Their private moments happen between meetings, stolen hours in palace courtyards, Caesar teaching Cleopatra Latin military commands, Cleopatra showing him Egyptian star charts, astronomy that predicts Nile floods centuries in advance. They're building something new, a hybrid government that combines Roman efficiency with Egyptian wisdom. But empires resist change, and the changes they're imagining would threaten everyone currently in power. In Rome, in Alexandria, everywhere. By 46 BC, they're essentially co-rulers. Caesar's edicts bear Egyptian seals. Cleopatra's decrees reference Roman law. They've created something unprecedented, joint leadership across two civilizations. Palace scribes struggle with protocol. Should Egyptian priests bow to Caesar? Should Roman legates acknowledge Cleopatra's authority? The bureaucracy of empire merging in real time. History watching two brilliant minds rewrite the rules of power itself. And some people are getting very nervous. Rewrite the rules of power itself. And some people are getting very nervous. Rewrite the rules of power itself. The letters from Rome grow sharper, senators demanding Caesar's return, accusations of abandoning Roman interests for Egyptian gold. Brutus writes personally, old friendship strained by months of silence, Caesar's loyalty questioned for the first time in his career. Cleopatra reads the correspondence over his shoulder, both of them recognizing the language. Not concern, threat. The Senate isn't requesting his presence anymore, they're commanding it, and Caesar has never responded well to commands. Their last winter in Alexandria carries weight, every conversation tinged with awareness that this might end. Caesar must return to Rome eventually. Cleopatra cannot leave Egypt indefinitely. They make plans anyway, summer palaces that span both empires, children educated in Rome and Alexandria equally, dreams that require them both staying alive, staying powerful, staying together, dreams that depend on Rome accepting what they've become. And Rome has never been good at accepting change. March 44 BC approaches. Caesar finally agrees to leave for Rome, promising to return before harvest season. They stand together on palace balconies overlooking the harbor, watching Roman ships prepare for departure. Neither mentions how different he looks lately, older, more tired, less certain, or how the letters from Rome have stopped coming entirely, the silence more ominous than accusations. Something fundamental has shifted, and they both feel it. The morning Caesar sails from Alexandria. Cleopatra watches his ship disappear into Mediterranean blue. Palace servants find her hours later, still standing on the harbor wall. The wind carries salt and possibility, and something else, the scent of endings, of choices made that can't be unmade. She doesn't know this is the last time she'll see him alive, but somewhere in her bones, something ancient whispers warnings. The gods have been watching, and they're about to collect. March 15th, 44 BCE. The Ides of March. 23 stab wounds pierce the most powerful man in Rome. Julius Caesar falls at the base of Pompey's statue, his blood pooling on marble steps. In Alexandria, a messenger arrives at dawn. Cleopatra receives the news in her private chambers. The father of her son is dead. The world tilts. Everything she's built with Rome, everything hangs in the balance. The palace grows quiet. Servants whisper in corners. Outside, Alexandria continues. Fishermen mending nets, merchants hawking spices, children playing in dusty courtyards. But inside these walls, Cleopatra stares at a letter written in Caesar's hand just weeks before, his promise to legitimize Caesarion, to make their son heir to Rome. Now that letter is just papyrus and ink, worthless as yesterday's bread. Caesarion is 3 years old. He has his father's sharp eyes, his mother's stubborn chin. He plays with wooden boats in a shallow pool, while Rome tears itself apart. Cleopatra watches him splash, knowing that boy's bloodline makes him the most dangerous child in the Mediterranean. Caesar's killers won't sleep peacefully, while Caesar's son draws breath. She must act quickly or lose everything that matters. The queen summons her closest advisors, ancient men who remember her father, women who've served 3 generations of Ptolemies. They gather in the map room, where papyrus scrolls cover every surface, trade routes marked in red ink, military positions in black, alliance treaties tied with silk ribbons, the game board of the ancient world, and Cleopatra must play it perfectly or watch Egypt fall to Roman wolves. She begins writing letters. Her reed pen scratches across papyrus as scribes prepare copies. Messages to Syria, to Cyprus, to Rhodes, each one carefully crafted, offering just enough, never too much. Trade agreements, grain shipments, safe passage for merchants, building a web of obligations that might protect Egypt when Rome's civil war spills across the Mediterranean. Every word calculated, every promise measured. Spring turns to summer. Reports arrive daily from Rome. Brutus and Cassius flee the city. Mark Antony seizes Caesar's papers, his fortune, his veterans. Octavian, Caesar's teenage heir, returns from Macedonia. Three men circle each other like lions, while the Senate pretends it still matters. Cleopatra reads each dispatch carefully, marking names, noting alliances. Someone will emerge victorious. She needs to choose correctly. The treasury masters spread gold coins across marble tables. Caesar's face stamped in profile, his name spelled out in Latin letters. Egyptian wealth, Roman currency. For 3 years, gold has flowed both ways. Now the streams might dry up completely. War is expensive. Loyalty costs even more. Cleopatra studies the ledgers, calculating how long Egypt can survive without Roman protection or Roman plunder. Autumn brings darker news. Cicero's speeches against Mark Antony echo through Rome's forum. Pompey's son Sextus controls Sicily, strangling grain shipments. Pirates raid merchant vessels flying Egyptian flags. The Mediterranean, once Caesar's lake, becomes a battlefield where every ship sails at its own risk. Cleopatra orders her fleet to stay in harbor. Better to lose profits than lose ships and crews. Then comes word of Philippi, October 42 BCE. Brutus and Cassius, Caesar's killers, fall on their own swords rather than face capture. The Republic dies with them. Three men now divide Rome's empire, like merchants splitting a cargo. Octavian takes the west, Lepidus gets Africa, and Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, claims the rich eastern provinces, including Egypt's borders. Mark Antony. Cleopatra remembers him from Alexandria, Caesar's shadow, always lurking nearby. Broad shoulders, scarred hands, a voice that carries across crowded rooms. He'd watched her during state dinners, measuring, calculating, not with Caesar's intellectual curiosity, but with something hungrier, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. Now he controls half the world, and he's summoning her to Tarsus. The invitation arrives on Egyptian papyrus, written by Roman scribes. Polite words that barely hide the command underneath. Queen Cleopatra is requested to attend Marcus Antonius at Tarsus to discuss Egyptian support for Rome's eastern campaigns. Requested, as if she has a choice, as if saying no wouldn't bring Roman legions marching south along the coast road. She sets the letter aside and begins planning. Her advisors debate for days. The old guard urges caution. Send ambassadors, offer tribute, avoid personal meetings. But Cleopatra understands what they cannot. This isn't about tribute or treaties. Antony could take Egypt's gold without negotiation. He wants something else, something that requires her presence. The question is whether she can give him what he wants while keeping what she needs. She orders the royal barge prepared, the same vessel that carried her to Caesar. Now it will carry her to another Roman. But this time feels different. Caesar had been calculating, distant, measuring her usefulness to his plans. Antony, she remembers his eyes following her movements, the way he smiled when she spoke. This meeting won't be about politics alone. It will be about desire and who controls whom. The night before departure, she walks through the palace gardens. Jasmine blooms in moonlight, filling the air with sweetness. Somewhere in these corridors, Caesarion sleeps peacefully, guarded by men sworn to die for him. Everything she does now is for that child. Every risk, every gamble, every calculated smile, and carefully chosen word. Egypt's future rests on her ability to make Romans need her more than they fear her. Dawn breaks over Alexandria's harbor. The royal barge waits at the marble quay, its purple sails furled, its golden prow gleaming in early light. Sailors check rigging while musicians tune their instruments. She's planned this meeting like a military campaign, every detail designed to impress, to seduce, to remind Antony that Egypt is more than a province to be conquered. It's a partner dangerous to ignore. As the barge pulls away from shore, Cleopatra watches Alexandria shrink to a line of white buildings against blue sky. Behind her lies everything she's built. Ahead waits everything she might lose. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly eastward, carrying her toward Tarsus, toward Marcus Antonius, toward whatever future she can shape from the wreckage of Caesar's dreams. The game begins again with higher stakes than ever before. Picture the Cydnus River in 41 BCE, golden water reflecting an impossible sight. Cleopatra had summoned Marcus Antonius, the Roman general who held the eastern Mediterranean in his weathered hands, but she wouldn't come crawling like other client kings. No, she would arrive as Aphrodite herself, goddess of love, stepping from myth into reality. The river carried whispers of what was coming, something that would reshape two empires and seal both their fates. Her royal barge appeared like a fever dream on that September afternoon. Purple sails billowed with perfumed wind, silver oars keeping time like a heartbeat. The boat itself seemed alive, gilded from bow to stern, every surface catching sunlight and throwing it back tenfold. Incense drifted across the water, thick and intoxicating. Romans had never seen anything like this. Neither, if we're being honest, had anyone else in the ancient world. She reclined beneath a canopy of golden cloth, dressed as Aphrodite rising from sea foam. Her attendants moved like dancers, some fanning her with peacock feathers, others playing flutes that seemed to make the very air shimmer. The smell of roses and frankincense preceded her by half a mile. This wasn't just pageantry. This was theater on a scale that made Roman triumphs look like village festivals, calculated to overwhelm every sense at once. Mark Antony waited on the riverbank, expecting a frightened queen begging for her kingdom. Instead, he found himself staring at a goddess who seemed to have descended specifically for him. The crowd around him fell silent. Even his hardened soldiers stopped their usual chatter. There's something about witnessing impossible beauty that makes people forget to breathe. The Queen of Egypt had just reminded Rome exactly who held the real power in this meeting. Their first words to each other have been lost to time, but we know the effect was immediate. Antony, who had conquered nations and bedded empresses, found himself completely disarmed by this 30-year-old woman who spoke 9 languages and had turned political survival into high art. She invited him to dine aboard her floating palace. He accepted without hesitation. Sometimes the most dangerous decisions feel like the most natural ones. That first dinner lasted until dawn. The royal barge transformed into something from another world. 1,000 oil lamps reflected in mirrors of polished bronze, casting everything in warm, honey-colored light. The air was thick with jasmine and wine. They reclined on couches draped in silk from Serica, eating from plates of hammered gold, while musicians played softly in the shadows. This was seduction as statecraft, intimacy weaponized, with precision. Cleopatra understood men like Antony, warriors who craved spectacle as much as they craved conquest. She served him delicacies he'd never imagined. Peacock tongues, wine aged in amphoras, older than his grandfather, honey cakes shaped like lotus blossoms that dissolved on the tongue like sweet dreams. Every course was theater, every gesture was calculated. And yet, something genuine sparked between them that night, something neither had planned for. He should have sailed back to Rome the next morning. His wife Fulvia was expecting him, his soldiers were growing restless, the triumvirate needed him. Instead, Antony found himself accepting another invitation, and another. The Queen of Egypt was spinning a golden web around him, and he was walking deeper into it with each passing day. Sometimes the most powerful men are the most vulnerable to precisely this kind of attention. Their relationship moved through Alexandria like wildfire through dry reeds. Every night brought new extravagances, banquets where the floors were carpeted with rose petals, 3 inches deep, private performances by the finest actors in the Mediterranean, gambling sessions where they wagered kingdoms like copper coins. The city itself seemed intoxicated by their presence. Even the air felt charged with possibility and danger. Cleopatra showed him wonders that existed nowhere else on earth. The great lighthouse casting its beam across waters that had witnessed the birth of civilization. Libraries holding scrolls that contained the collected wisdom of centuries. Gardens where exotic birds sang in languages that sounded almost human. She was offering him not just her body, but her world, a universe of beauty and knowledge that Rome, for all its power, could never match. They formed a drinking society called the Inimitable Livers, a club dedicated to experiencing every pleasure life could offer. Members included poets, philosophers, generals, and courtesans. They would spend entire nights discussing everything from military strategy to the nature of love, wine flowing like water, laughter echoing through marble halls. It was decadent beyond imagination, and perhaps the happiest either of them had ever been. But beneath the luxury, politics churned like a restless sea. Every kiss was a treaty negotiation. Every night spent in her arms was another day. Egypt remained free from Roman annexation. Cleopatra was gambling everything on Antony's growing infatuation. She needed him not just as a lover, but as a protector. The question was whether passion could really shield a kingdom from the grinding machinery of empire. Antony began adopting Egyptian customs, wearing silk instead of wool, speaking Greek at formal dinners, even participating in religious ceremonies honoring Isis and Osiris. His Roman officers watched with growing alarm. This wasn't just cultural appreciation, this was transformation. The man who had once shared power with Caesar was slowly becoming something else entirely, someone else entirely. Love, it seemed, was the most dangerous conquest of all. Word of their affair reached Rome like a plague, carried by merchant ships. Fulvia, Antony's abandoned wife, began raising armies in his name, partly to defend his interests, partly to force him home. Octavian, his co-ruler, smiled coldly and began making lists. The triumvirate was cracking along lines no one had anticipated. Love had introduced chaos into the careful balance of Roman politics, and chaos, historically, has never been kind to lovers. Yet in those golden months of 41 BCE, none of that seemed to matter. Antony and Cleopatra moved through Alexandria like figures from legend, beautiful, powerful, seemingly untouchable. They hunted together in the delta marshes, sailed pleasure barges down the Nile, made love in chambers lined with lapis lazuli. Time felt suspended, as if the gods themselves had granted them permission to exist outside the normal rules of mortality and consequence. What they had built together was magnificent and fragile as spun glass. Two cultures blending, two hearts synchronizing, two ambitions becoming one. But empires are jealous lovers, and Rome was already sharpening its knives. The meeting on the Cydnus had lit a fuse that would burn for 11 years, consuming everything in its path. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are also the most tragic. Sometimes they're the same story entirely. Chapter 7: The Power Collectors. Alexandria, 36 BCE. Two minds that understood hunger not for bread or wine, but for empires. Cleopatra traced maps on silk with her finger while Antony watched. Here, she whispered, pointing to provinces that stretched beyond the Mediterranean. Here is where we plant our flag. Their bed became a war room. Their war room became intimate theater. Power, they discovered, tasted different when shared between equals who refused to bow to Rome's old men. She kept scrolls of tribute records stacked beside their breakfast table. Egypt's wealth flowing like honey, gold from Nubia, spices from distant shores, grain that could feed armies. Antony learned to read Egyptian numerals by candlelight. Watch this, she said, spreading parchment across marble. These numbers, they represent something Rome never understood. Not just wealth, independence, the power to say no. He traced symbols he couldn't pronounce, but felt their weight, mathematics of revolution. Their public appearances were calculated theater. Cleopatra arriving at banquets dressed as Aphrodite, gold dust in her hair catching torchlight. Antony beside her, playing Dionysus with practiced ease. Romans whispered about excess, the pearl dissolved in wine, the barge with purple sails. But behind every spectacle lay strategy. Each feast was a political statement. Each gift to local governors bought loyalty. Performance as diplomacy, love as leverage, theater that could topple governments. In private, they studied maps until oil lamps flickered low, Cleopatra's finger tracing trade routes, while Antony calculated troop movements. Here she pointed to Cyprus, copper mines. Here to Crete, naval ports. Their pillow talk was conquest planning, not just military campaigns, but economic networks. She taught him Egyptian banking systems. He showed her Roman engineering techniques. Two strategists sharing secrets in the dark, building an empire, one whispered conversation at a time. Letters from Rome arrived daily, Octavian's spies reporting their every move. Senate debates about Eastern corruption, old senators clutching their togas, horrified by reports of foreign influence. Antony would read these dispatches aloud while Cleopatra braided her hair. Let them talk, she said. Words from frightened men who've never left Italy. We're building something they can't imagine. He folded the scrolls carefully. Soon they won't have the luxury of talking. Soon they'll have to choose sides. Their children played between throne rooms and libraries, Caesarion teaching the twins to read hieroglyphics, while baby Ptolemy slept in silk wrappings. Cleopatra wanted them raised bilingual, bicultural, future pharaohs who could negotiate with Roman senators. Antony carved wooden toys between military briefings. This is what we fight for, he told her one evening, watching their daughter practice Egyptian dance steps. Not just territory, legacy, a world where their children won't have to choose between being Egyptian or Roman. Wealth flowed through Alexandria like the Nile in flood season, merchants from India unloading pearls, Syrian glass blowers creating windows for new palaces. But Cleopatra's real treasure was information. Her network of traders carried more than silk and spices. They brought news: who was building ships, which provinces were restless, where Roman loyalty was cracking. Knowledge as currency, secrets as weapons. Every caravan that entered Egypt carried intelligence that could reshape the Mediterranean world. Some nights they walked Alexandria's streets in disguise, common cloaks hiding royal identities, listening to tavern conversations, merchant complaints, soldier gossip. The city pulsed with ambition and anxiety. People knew change was coming. They could feel it in the harbor winds, see it in the increased guard patrols. Cleopatra touched rough stone walls, heard prayers in 6 languages. "This is what we protect," she whispered. "Not just a city, a crossroads, where East meets West and creates something new." Antony's Roman identity slowly unraveled like old rope, years of Eastern customs weaving themselves into his daily habits. He learned to appreciate dates stuffed with almonds, to find beauty in Arabic poetry. His Latin carried Egyptian inflections now. Roman friends visiting Alexandria barely recognized him. "You've gone native," they said with distaste. But Antony felt more himself than ever. Rome had always felt like a costume. Here in Cleopatra's world, he discovered who he might have been. Military preparations required delicate balance, building strength without provoking premature war. Ships constructed in hidden harbors, officers recruited through private networks. Cleopatra's treasury funded Roman veterans, willing to serve Eastern gold instead of Senate promises. Each recruitment was risky. Each ship launched was declaration. They were past the point of peaceful resolution, but not quite ready for open conflict, walking a tightrope over an abyss, knowing eventually they'd have to jump. Late one autumn night, Cleopatra woke to find Antony staring at stars through window lattice, calculating something she couldn't see. "Tomorrow we cross the line," he said quietly. "No more pretending this is just an alliance. No more Roman masks." She joined him at the window, her hand finding his. "We've already crossed it," she replied. "The moment you chose Egypt over Rome, we became enemies of the state. Now we just have to win." Stars reflected in the harbor below, like scattered diamonds. The decision came during a feast honoring Isis. Wine flowing, musicians playing, courtiers dancing under Alexandria's starlit sky. A messenger arrived with sealed orders from Rome. Octavian's ultimatum: return to Italy immediately, or face charges of treason. Antony read the parchment twice. The room fell silent. Courtiers held their breath. He looked at Cleopatra, then at their children sleeping in silk-curtained alcoves. "Some choices," he said slowly, "make themselves." He tore the message into careful pieces. That torn message scattered like snow across marble floors, each piece a burned bridge back to his Roman past. Cleopatra watched servants sweep away fragments of his former life. "There's no returning now," she said. He nodded, feeling strangely light. Liberation disguised as destruction, the weight of Roman expectations, family obligations, political compromises, all gone. For the first time in decades, he was free to choose his own path, even if that path led to war, even if it led to ruin. Word spread through Alexandria like wildfire. Antony had chosen Egypt over Rome. Markets buzzed with nervous energy. Temple priests offered extra sacrifices. Mothers clutched children closer, remembering civil wars of previous generations. But in the palace, strange calm settled over daily routines. The waiting was over, uncertainty replaced with clarity. They were rebels now, officially. No more diplomatic pretense, no more careful neutrality. War was coming, but at least they'd meet it as equals, united, unashamed. Cleopatra moved through palace halls with new purpose, no longer a foreign queen, maintaining careful alliances, but a co-ruler of a rebel empire. She ordered engineers to strengthen harbor defenses, sent envoys to recruit allies from Nubia to Arabia. Her dreams had crystallized into strategy. Egypt would not kneel to Rome again, not while she breathed, not while Antony stood beside her. The die was cast, the board was set. Two empires were about to collide. As winter winds swept across the Mediterranean, carrying rumors of Roman fleets gathering in Italian ports, Antony found Cleopatra in the palace library, reading by lamplight. Homer's Iliad, he noticed, preparing for our own Troy. She said without looking up. He sat beside her, close enough to read over her shoulder. The final pages, where heroes die and cities burn. She closed the scroll gently, but sometimes, she whispered, the poets get it wrong. Sometimes love conquers all. In Rome, whispers turned to roars. Octavian watched his rival Antony grow drunk on Egyptian promises, and something cold settled in his chest. The young Caesar's heir had waited long enough. While Antony played at being pharaoh beside Cleopatra, Rome's future hung in the balance. Octavian understood what many Romans felt, but dared not say aloud. This foreign queen had bewitched their greatest general. The time for subtlety had passed. War was coming, and Octavian would make sure Rome remembered who its true sons were. Cleopatra read the dispatches from Rome with steady hands, though her heart raced. Octavian's name appeared in every letter, every whispered report from her spies. She had expected this. The young Roman was ambitious, ruthless, and worst of all, intelligent. He understood that defeating Antony meant destroying the Egyptian alliance first. In her private chambers, she studied maps by candlelight, calculating distances, resources, time. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was survival, and she had never been more dangerous than when cornered. The Roman Senate buzzed with manufactured outrage. Octavian stood before them, his voice carrying across marble floors with practiced conviction. He spoke of Roman honor, of ancient traditions threatened by foreign influence. Each word was chosen carefully, each pause calculated for maximum effect. The senators nodded, some genuinely convinced, others simply recognizing which way the political winds were blowing. Octavian's gift wasn't just ambition, it was making his personal grudges feel like Rome's sacred duty. The propaganda machine had begun to turn. Across the Mediterranean, Antony felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Letters from Rome carried accusations wrapped in legal language. His marriage to Cleopatra, legitimate in Egyptian eyes, was painted as betrayal in Roman ones. His children with her became evidence of his corruption. Standing on Alexandria's harbor, watching ships arrive with increasingly desperate messages from his remaining allies, Antony realized he was no longer just choosing between two women. He was choosing between two worlds, and Rome was forcing his hand. Cleopatra's spies brought news that made her blood run cold. In Rome's markets, storytellers spun tales of the Egyptian witch who had enslaved noble Antony with dark magic. Artists carved her image as a serpent, a monster, a destroyer of Roman virtue. She had expected military opposition, political maneuvering, even assassination attempts. But this systematic destruction of her reputation, her very humanity, this was warfare of a different kind. Octavian was proving himself a master of something she had underestimated: public opinion. In Alexandria's royal library, Cleopatra worked through the night. Scrolls covered her desk, trade agreements, military reports, diplomatic correspondence. She was fighting a war on multiple fronts now. Every grain shipment to Rome became a political statement. Every meeting with foreign ambassadors was scrutinized for signs of weakness or strength. Her advisors urged caution, but she understood something they didn't. Octavian had made this personal the moment he made her the enemy. There could be no middle ground, no negotiated peace, only victory or death. The propaganda flowed like poison through Roman streets. Octavian's writers crafted stories that transformed Cleopatra from a sophisticated ruler into a cartoon villain. She was simultaneously a seductress who corrupted men through lust, and a power hungry tyrant who sought to rule Rome itself. The contradiction didn't matter. Fear rarely required logical consistency. Roman mothers began using her name to frighten misbehaving children. Cleopatra, who had spent years cultivating relationships with Roman intellectuals and politicians, watched her life's work dissolve into caricature and hatred. Antony's Roman friends began to distance themselves. Invitations stopped coming. Old allies sent polite letters explaining why they could no longer support his cause. The political isolation was methodical, surgical. Octavian wasn't just defeating Antony. Militarily, he was erasing him socially, culturally, historically. In Alexandria, Antony paced the palace floors like a caged lion. He had fought in Gaul, conquered in the East, commanded the loyalty of legions. But this new kind of warfare, fought with words and whispers, left him feeling helpless and outmaneuvered. Cleopatra understood the game better than Antony did. She had been playing politics since childhood, had learned to read the subtle currents of power that men often missed. Octavian was isolating them systematically, turning every strength into a weakness. Her wealth became evidence of Egyptian greed. Her intelligence became proof of foreign manipulation. Her love for Antony became a weapon of corruption. She began planning not just for war, but for the war after the war, the battle for history itself, where the victor would write her story. Roman poets paid with Octavian's gold, wrote verses that painted Cleopatra as Rome's greatest threat since Hannibal. They described her palace as a den of vice, her court as a carnival of corruption. The truth that she was a brilliant administrator who had stabilized Egypt and created unprecedented prosperity disappeared beneath layers of manufactured scandal. Late at night, alone in her chambers, Cleopatra sometimes wondered if this was how all great women were remembered, not for what they built, but for how men chose to destroy them. The conspiracies grew bolder as Octavian's confidence increased. Roman merchants in Alexandria reported back on Egyptian military preparations. Diplomats carried messages that were carefully crafted to provoke rather than resolve. Even dinner parties became intelligence operations, with guests chosen for their potential usefulness rather than their conversation. Cleopatra moved through this maze of deception with careful grace, knowing that every word she spoke might be twisted, every gesture analyzed for signs of weakness. The personal had become completely political, and privacy was now a luxury she couldn't afford. Octavian's masterstroke was making Cleopatra's strength seem like Antony's weakness. Her political acumen became his manipulation. Her financial support became his dependence. Her love became his corruption. Roman citizens, who had once admired Antony's military genius, now saw him as a fallen hero brought low by foreign temptation. The narrative was simple, powerful, and almost impossible to counter. How do you argue against a story that people want to believe? How do you fight an enemy who has made your very existence the problem? In Rome's taverns and marketplaces, Cleopatra became a symbol of everything Romans feared about the wider world: foreign influence, female power, Eastern luxury corrupting Roman virtue, the woman who spoke 9 languages, who had negotiated with kings and philosophers, who had turned Egypt into the Mediterranean's most prosperous nation. She was reduced to a collection of fears and fantasies. Octavian had weaponized Roman xenophobia and misogyny so effectively that many Romans genuinely believed they were defending civilization itself. The propaganda had become its own reality. As winter turned to spring, both sides prepared for the inevitable. Ships gathered in harbors, armies moved toward strategic positions, diplomats made final half-hearted attempts at negotiation that everyone knew would fail. But the real war had already begun, fought in the minds and hearts of Romans who would never see a battlefield. Octavian had convinced them that this wasn't just a civil war between rival politicians, it was a holy war between Roman virtue and foreign corruption. Cleopatra and Antony found themselves cast as enemies of civilization itself. The most intimate moments became the most political ones. Every kiss between Cleopatra and Antony was described in Roman streets as evidence of his corruption. Every private conversation was imagined as a scene of manipulation and control. Their bedroom, once a refuge from the pressures of ruling 2 of the world's greatest powers, became a symbol in Octavian's propaganda campaign. Love itself was weaponized, turned into proof of weakness rather than strength. The personal had become completely inescapably public, and privacy was a casualty of war. As this chapter of their story closed, Cleopatra and Antony faced a truth that many lovers throughout history would recognize. Sometimes the world won't let you simply be happy. Sometimes your private choices become public battles. Sometimes love itself becomes a revolutionary act that threatens the established order. Standing together on Alexandria's palace balcony, watching the sun set over the harbor where their fate would soon be decided, they understood that they were fighting for more than political power. They were fighting for the right to define their own story. Chapter 9. The Battle of Actium. September 2nd, 31 BC. The morning sun rises over waters that will soon turn red. Cleopatra's golden ships bob beside Antony's Roman vessels, an alliance forged in bedchambers, now tested by the brutal mathematics of war. Neither of them knows it yet, but this day will shatter everything they've built together. Their empire, their love, their very sense of who they are. The sea holds its breath. Octavian's fleet appears on the horizon like a judgment, 400 ships bearing the future of Rome and the end of everything Cleopatra has fought to preserve. She stands on her flagship's deck, purple silk whipping in the salt wind. Her hands grip the rail so tightly her knuckles show white against golden skin. Somewhere in that approaching wall of bronze and oak sails her nephew's destiny and her own destruction. Antony paces his command ship like a caged lion. The man who once conquered half the world now faces his greatest battle and his deepest fear. Not death, not defeat, but the possibility that everything he sacrificed for love might crumble in a single afternoon. His generals watch him with careful eyes. They've seen him brilliant. They've seen him drunk. Today they see him desperate. Desperation makes men dangerous, sometimes to themselves. The first arrows fly at noon, not the clean death of sword against sword, but the messy chaos of naval war. Ships ramming into ships, men falling screaming into water that turns pink, then red, then black with blood and oil. The sound, gods, the sound, splintering wood, bronze tearing through bronze, and underneath it all, the ocean swallowing everything whole. This is how empires die. not with trumpets, but with drowning. Cleopatra watches her Egyptian crews fighting beside Roman soldiers, men who weeks ago spoke different languages, worshiped different gods, now bleeding the same red into the same unforgiving sea. This is what she wanted: unity between East and West. But not like this, never like this. The dream she shared with Antony is burning around them, and the smoke stings her eyes. Or maybe those are tears. Even queens are allowed to weep. The afternoon brings fire, Greek fire, that terrible invention that burns even on water. Orange flames dance across the waves like something from the underworld. Ships become floating pyres, their crews jumping into an ocean that offers no mercy. The air fills with ash and screams, and the sweet, sick smell of burning flesh. Antony's flagship takes a direct hit. For a moment, Cleopatra thinks she's lost him. Her heart stops completely, but Antony survives. Of course he does. The man is too stubborn to die easily. He transfers to another ship, then another, always pushing toward the thickest fighting. His men follow him because that's what soldiers do. They follow their general into hell if necessary. And this is definitely hell. A hell of their own making, painted in Egyptian gold and Roman red, the colors of their impossible love story. By evening, the truth becomes unavoidable. They're losing, not just the battle, everything. Their combined fleet scattered, their alliance cracking, their future dissolving like salt in seawater. Cleopatra feels at first that cold certainty that settles in your bones when hope finally dies. She looks across the chaos toward Antony's ship. He's still fighting, still believing they can somehow turn this disaster around. Sweet, foolish, magnificent man. And then she makes the choice that will define her forever. Cleopatra orders her ships to withdraw, not retreat, withdrawal. There's a difference, she tells herself. Retreat suggests panic. Withdrawal suggests strategy. But her captains know better. They've seen enough battles to recognize defeat when it stares them in the face. Still, they obey because she's Cleopatra, because she's their queen, because sometimes loyalty means following someone into the dark. Antony sees her ships turning away, and something breaks inside him. The woman he loves, the woman he's sacrificed everything for, abandoning him at the moment he needs her most. Or maybe she's saving them both. He can't tell anymore. Love and politics have become so tangled in his mind that he can't separate them. All he knows is she's leaving, and he can't bear to watch Rome burn without her. So he follows. Marcus Antonius, who once made the earth tremble beneath his legions, abandons his own men to chase after a woman. His remaining ships watch in stunned silence as their commander sails away from the battle. Some call it cowardice, others call it love. History will spend centuries arguing about which is worse, but in that moment, bleeding and exhausted, Antony only knows he can't exist in a world without her. They meet in open water, their damaged ships limping toward each other like wounded animals seeking comfort. When Antony finally climbs aboard Cleopatra's flagship, she doesn't speak, neither does he. What words could possibly explain what just happened? They've lost everything: their fleet, their army, their claim to the future. All that remains is this: two broken people clinging to each other while their world collapses around them. The journey back to Egypt takes 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silence and salt-stained tears, and the terrible weight of knowing they've failed. Not just as rulers, as lovers. The thing they built together, this impossible dream of East and West united, lies at the bottom of the sea near Actium. All those grand plans, All those whispered promises, all those nights when they believed love could conquer politics. How naive they were. But here's the strange thing about love. Even broken, it endures. Sitting in her cabin as Alexandria's towers come into view, Cleopatra reaches for Antony's hand. His fingers are rough from rope burns, scarred from sword work, trembling from exhaustion, but they're warm, still alive, still hers. Maybe that's enough. Maybe two people holding on to each other while the world ends around them is its own kind of victory. Alexandria welcomes them home with surprising gentleness. No crowds, no fanfare, just the soft light of sunset painting the harbor gold and the sound of water lapping against stone. Home. The word tastes different now, smaller, somehow. Once their love was going to reshape the world. Now it's barely enough to hold together two broken hearts. But maybe that's what love really is. Not conquest, just holding on. As their ship docks, Cleopatra knows this isn't an ending. Not yet. Octavian will come for them probably before winter. The wheel of fate that once lifted them so high is turning again, grinding toward its inevitable conclusion. But tonight, in the palace where they first found each other, they'll have what time remains. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps love was never meant to last forever. Perhaps it was only meant to burn bright while it could. The marble floors of Alexandria's palace echo differently now, hollow like walking through a tomb. Cleopatra moves through rooms that once sparkled with golden vessels and silk hangings. Now the walls seem bare, stripped of their confidence. And when je porte better fiep, outside, the Mediterranean wind carries news of Octavian's advancing ships. Inside, servants whisper behind closed doors. The air smells of frankincense and fear. Even the cats that roam the corridors step more carefully, sensing something broken in the rhythm of their world. Antony sits in his chambers, still wearing yesterday's tunic. The fabric clings to his shoulders, damp with sweat and regret. His hands shake slightly as he holds a cup of wine, the same hands that once commanded legions across Gaul and Germania. The silver cup bears dents from campaigns he can barely remember now. Through the window, Alexandria spreads below him like a chessboard where all the pieces have been captured. He drinks, but the wine tastes like defeat. Cleopatra finds him there as the sun reaches its peak. She wears a simple white linen dress, no gold, no jewels, just the kind of garment Egyptian women have worn for 3,000 years. Her bare feet make no sound on the stone floor. When she places her hand on his shoulder, Antony flinches, not from her touch, but from the gentleness of it. He expected rage. Instead, she offers him silence, and somehow that feels more devastating than any accusation could. The maps spread across the table tell a story written in red ink. Territories lost, allies fled, supply lines severed. Cleopatra traces the coastline with her finger, following the path Octavian's fleet will take. Her touch is steady, methodical. She's calculating something. Antony watches her work, remembering the first time he saw her think through a problem. Back then, her confidence thrilled him. Now it breaks his heart. She's planning their next move while he can barely plan his next breath. The treasury vault stands nearly empty. Gold coins that once formed small mountains now scatter in thin layers across the marble floor. Each footstep echoes against emptiness. Cleopatra picks up a single denarius, examining Caesar's profile etched in silver. The metal feels cold against her palm. She remembers when these vaults groaned under the weight of Egypt's wealth. Now she counts coins like a merchant's wife, calculating how many meals they'll buy, how many soldiers they might still afford to keep. Letters arrive daily from Rome, each one bearing Octavian's seal. The wax is always perfect, unbroken, pristine, like everything about Caesar's heir. Cleopatra reads them aloud to Antony, her voice never wavering. Octavian offers terms: surrender, exile, a small villa somewhere far from the Mediterranean. The letters are polite, almost kind. They make her want to throw something heavy at the wall. Kindness from an enemy feels worse than honest hatred. At least hatred respects your worth enough to fear you. The palace gardens wilt in the heat. Roses that bloomed magnificently just months ago now hang brown and brittle on their stems. The fountain in the center courtyard still runs, but the water level drops each day. Gardeners who once tended these grounds with pride now steal away under cover of darkness. Cleopatra walks the pathways alone, her sandals crunching on fallen petals. She stops at the lotus pond, where she and Antony used to feed the fish. The fish are gone. Antony's generals arrive for their final council meeting. Their faces carry the weight of men who know they're discussing surrender, not strategy. They sit around the familiar oak table, but the chairs feel different, harder, less comfortable. The wine they're served is cheaper now. Everyone notices, no one mentions it. When Cleopatra enters the room, they stand as they always have. Some habits survive even defeat. She takes her place beside Antony, her spine straight, her voice clear and commanding. The war room buzzes with desperate energy. Maps cover every surface, marked with red crosses where battles were lost, blue circles where hope might still exist. Messengers rush in and out, their faces grim. Cleopatra stands at the center, directing movements like a conductor leading her final symphony. Her voice cuts through the chaos, calm and precise. She assigns ships to patrol routes, splits remaining troops between defensive positions. She's fighting a war she knows she cannot win, and she does it beautifully. Night brings no peace to Alexandria. Oil lamps flicker in windows throughout the city as families pack belongings they can carry. The wealthy load carriages with whatever treasures will fit. The poor gather their children and pray to gods who seem to have stopped listening. In the palace, Cleopatra sits beside Antony's bed, watching him sleep fitfully. His breathing is shallow, interrupted by mumbled words she can't understand. She reaches for his hand, finding it cold despite the warm Egyptian night. Dawn reveals new ships on the horizon, Octavian's fleet drawing closer with each tide. Cleopatra stands on the palace balcony, counting sails against the morning light. 40 ships, maybe 50. She's lost count, and that frightens her more than the ships themselves. A queen who cannot count her enemy's strength has already lost half the battle. Behind her, Antony joins her at the railing. His hand finds her shoulder, and for a moment they watch their doom approach together in comfortable silence. The last feast in Alexandria's great hall tastes of ash and remembrance. Platters hold simple bread, olives, wine that's turned slightly sour in the heat. 20 people sit at a table built for 100. Their voices echo in the vast space, swallowed by emptiness. Cleopatra raises her cup in a toast to Egypt, to love, to battles fought with honor even in defeat. The wine slides down her throat like liquid grief. She drinks it anyway, because some rituals matter more than taste. Antony's sword lies forgotten on the armory floor, its bronze blade tarnished from neglect. He used to polish it every morning, a ritual from his younger days as a common soldier. Now his hands shake too much to hold it steady. Cleopatra finds him there, staring at the weapon that once made him famous from Britain to Egypt. She kneels beside him, her silk dress pooling on the cold stone. Together, they lift the sword, her steady hands guiding his trembling ones along the familiar blade. The servants who remain grow bold in their desperation. They help themselves to small treasures, a silver spoon, a bolt of linen, whatever fits in their robes. Cleopatra pretends not to notice. What use is palace discipline when the palace itself stands doomed? She finds strange comfort in their petty thefts. At least someone still believes these objects hold value. At least someone thinks they have a future worth stealing for. She wonders if they'll remember her kindly when they're far from here. The final message arrives from Octavian at sunset. No more offers, no more terms, just a demand for unconditional surrender by dawn. Cleopatra breaks the wax seal with steady fingers, reading silently while Antony watches her face. Her expression never changes, but he sees something shift behind her eyes. When she finishes, she folds the letter carefully and places it in the fire. They watch the parchment curl and blacken, sending their last chance up in smoke. Neither speaks. What is there left to say? Midnight in Alexandria feels different than any midnight before. The city holds its breath, waiting for dawn to bring whatever comes next. In their chambers, Cleopatra and Antony lie awake side by side, not touching, but sharing the same darkness. Outside, the Mediterranean laps against the harbor walls with unusual gentleness, as if the sea itself mourns for what tomorrow will take away. They have each other. They have this moment. They have nothing else left to lose. Sometimes that's enough. The once great Mark Antony paced his chambers like a caged animal, his empire crumbling, his soldiers deserting, his name becoming a whisper of shame across the Mediterranean. The man who had commanded legions now couldn't command his own fate. Outside, Alexandria burned with rumors of defeat. Inside, Antony's hands shook as he reached for wine that no longer dulled the sharp edge of reality, cutting through his chest. News travels fast when empires fall. A breathless messenger burst through the palace doors. "She's gone, my lord. The queen, Cleopatra, is dead." The words hit Antony like physical blows. His knees buckled. The woman he'd abandoned Rome for, sacrificed everything for, gone. The messenger's face was streaked with dust and sweat, but Antony saw only darkness. His reason for living had just vanished into the Egyptian heat. In that moment, something fundamental broke inside Antony's chest. Not his heart, something deeper, his sense of purpose, of identity, of why he drew breath at all. He'd been a general, a triumvir, a lover of the most powerful woman in the world. Now he was nothing, a man without a country, without an army, without the woman who had redefined his understanding of desire itself. The silence stretched endlessly. Antony's sword felt heavier than it had in decades of battle. This wasn't about courage, it was about mathematics. The cold calculation that his life had become unsustainable. His reflection in the polished bronze blade showed a stranger's face, hollow cheeks, haunted eyes, the ghost of the man who once made Caesar himself nervous. He pressed the tip against his chest, just below the ribs. The blade slipped between bone and flesh with surprising ease. Antony gasped, not from pain, but from the sudden realization that dying hurt less than living had these past months. Blood, warm and thick, spread across his tunic. He collapsed onto the marble floor, watching sunlight from the window dance across the pool of red growing beneath him. Time moved differently now, slower, more honest. But death, it seemed, wouldn't come quickly. Antony lay there, breathing in shallow gasps, listening to his own heartbeat grow irregular. The wound was deep, but not immediately fatal. He'd miscalculated even this final act. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, servants, perhaps, or guards coming to check on their dying commander. His vision blurred at the edges, but consciousness stubbornly remained, trapping him between worlds. Miles away, in her secret chamber, Cleopatra was very much alive. She'd orchestrated the false rumor of her death, a desperate gambit to buy time, to make Octavian hesitate, to create some small advantage in an unwinnable war. But she hadn't anticipated how quickly the lie would reach Antony. She paced her hidden room, unaware that her lover was bleeding out while believing she was already gone. A servant burst into Cleopatra's sanctuary, face white with terror. "My queen, Lord Antony, he's the sword." The words tumbled out in fragments, but Cleopatra understood instantly. Her clever deception had backfired catastrophically. The man she loved was dying because he thought she was already dead. She ran through the palace corridors, her golden sandals slapping against marble, her heart pounding against her ribs. Cleopatra found Antony in a growing pool of blood, his breathing shallow and labored. His eyes found hers, and for a moment confusion flickered across his face. "You're alive." His voice was barely a whisper. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over the wound, afraid to touch, afraid to make it worse. "I'm here," she whispered back. "I'm here, my love." She cradled his head in her lap, his blood staining her white linen gown. Antony's eyes were losing focus, but he smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months. I thought I'd lost you." His hand found hers, grip weak but determined. "I couldn't bear a world without your voice in it." Each word cost him tremendous effort, but he needed to say them. Cleopatra pressed her forehead against his, tears falling onto his cheeks. This brilliant, flawed, impossible man had loved her enough to follow her into ruin, and now enough to die believing she'd left him first. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "Not any of it. Not the wars, not the politics, not this." His thumb traced her jaw one last time, memorizing the curve of her face. Antony's breathing grew more labored. "Take care of yourself," he managed, each word a struggle. Don't let them parade you through Rome." His eyes searched hers desperately. "Promise me, die as a queen, not as their trophy." The effort exhausted him, but he held her gaze until she nodded. Only then did some tension leave his body, like he could finally let go. The great Mark Antony died as the sun set over Alexandria, not on a battlefield surrounded by cheering soldiers, but in the arms of the woman who had redefined love for him. His last breath was so quiet, Cleopatra almost missed it. She sat there for a long time afterward, holding his still warm body, feeling the weight of his absence settle into her bones like winter cold. When she finally stood, Cleopatra felt ancient, older than the pyramids, older than the Nile itself. The palace around her seemed enormous and empty, every room echoing with memories of what had been lost. She walked to the window and looked out at her city, her Egypt, knowing that both her heart and her kingdom were dying. The mathematics of love and power had finally balanced out to zero. Servants whispered in distant corridors, their voices carrying on the night air. Soon, Octavian would arrive with his legions. Soon, the last pharaoh of Egypt would face the choice Antony had made, surrender to Rome's mercy, or choose her own ending. She touched her lips where his final kiss still lingered, tasting salt from her tears mixed with the metallic tang of his blood. Cleopatra stood alone in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been. Tomorrow would bring decisions that would echo through history, but tonight she mourned the man who had loved her enough to die for the rumor of her death, and she prepared her heart for the final act of a drama that had begun when she was still young enough to believe love could conquer empires. The palace feels different now, empty. Cleopatra walks these halls where she once commanded empires, where Roman generals bent the knee, but Antony's blood has barely dried on the marble floors, and now there's only one man left who holds her fate. Octavian, the boy who grew into Rome's most calculating mind. The last negotiation of her life awaits. She's lost everything except what matters most. Her children, Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, the twins with Antony. They sleep in guarded chambers while their mother prepares for the most important conversation of her reign. Not for Egypt's glory this time, but for their right to breathe tomorrow's air. Her servants dress her carefully, not in the golden regalia of a pharaoh, but in simple white linen, strategic vulnerability, every gesture calculated, even now, the kohl around her eyes applied with precision, because she knows Octavian will be studying her face for weakness, looking for the moment she breaks. The meeting chamber overlooks Alexandria's harbor. Roman ships block the horizon like iron teeth. Octavian enters without ceremony, young, pale, unremarkable, except for those cold gray eyes that see everything. He settles across from her with the confidence of a man who already owns tomorrow. She begins as she always has, with intelligence, speaks of Egypt's wealth, its grain shipments that feed Rome's hungry masses, how her cooperation could benefit his new empire. The words flow like honey, each sentence designed to plant seeds of possibility. But Octavian's expression never changes. Desperate now, she appeals to Roman honor, reminds him that she ruled justly, that Egypt prospered under her hand, that even enemies can respect worthy adversaries. Her voice carries the authority of 20 years on the throne, but it bounces off him like stones off marble. Then she speaks of her children. The tremor in her voice now is real, not performed. Caesarion carries Caesar's blood. Surely Rome remembers its greatest general with some fondness. The twins are barely old enough to understand their danger. They've done nothing wrong, nothing at all. Octavian's response cuts like winter wind. Caesar's son is precisely the problem, a living symbol of the old guard, the Republic's death. As for Antony's children, they represent everything Rome wants to forget. His words are soft, reasonable, terrifyingly final. She feels the walls closing in, but refuses to surrender, offers herself as hostage, as ornament for his triumph, promises to walk in golden chains through Rome's streets if he'll spare them. The humiliation would be complete, perfect. Surely that's enough vengeance for any man? For a moment, she tries seduction, the old weapon that conquered Julius Caesar, that held Marcus Antony for years. But Octavian is immune to desire, powered by pure ambition instead of passion. Her beauty is just another tool he's already calculated against. The truth emerges slowly. He wants her alive. Yes, but only for the parade through Rome, to be displayed like a captured beast, proof of his dominance over the legendary queen. Her children, though, they're loose ends. Threats to the order he's building. She sees it now, finally. The game is rigged, has been from the moment Antony fell on his sword. Octavian didn't come here to negotiate. He came to watch her realize her powerlessness. To savor the moment, Egypt's last pharaoh understood her choices had vanished. One last plea, tears from her throat. Not as a queen, not as a politician, but as a mother watching wolves circle her cubs. Her voice breaks on their names: Caesarion, Alexander, Cleopatra Selene, Ptolemy, each name a prayer he won't answer. Octavian rises, smooths his toga, checks the sun's position through the window. The meeting is over. His guards will escort her back to her chambers, her golden prison, while he decides the exact details of her humiliation. The children will be handled separately. Alone again, she stares at Alexandria's harbor, where Roman ships wait like patient vultures. 20 years of brilliant political maneuvering reduced to this helpless maternal grief. The woman who seduced empires can't save her own children from one cold young man. But Cleopatra VII Philopator, last pharaoh of Egypt, descendant of Alexander's general, she's not finished yet. If she can't bargain for mercy, if she can't seduce or threaten or charm her way to victory, there's still one move left. One final choice that remains hers alone. Alexandria holds its breath in the summer heat of 30 BCE. Inside her palace chambers, Cleopatra sits at her ivory table, fingers tracing the edge of a papyrus scroll. The walls around her whisper with 39 years of secrets, victories, defeats, love affairs that shaped empires. Outside, Roman soldiers sharpen their swords. But here, in this quiet space, the last pharaoh of Egypt prepares for her final act of rebellion. She's always understood power differently than men do. While Caesar and Antony conquered with armies, she conquered with intellect, with presence that could fill a room before she even spoke. Now, facing capture by Octavian, she refuses to become a trophy dragged through Roman streets. Her death will be her choice, her terms. The golden cobra bracelet on her wrist catches the afternoon light filtering through silk curtains. The servants know something has changed. They move through the palace corridors with hushed steps, carrying silver trays of figs and honey cakes that will go untouched. Cleopatra has dismissed most of her court, keeping only Eris and Charmian, her most trusted companions. These women have shared her secrets since they were girls playing in temple gardens. Now they'll share her final secret too. She bathes in water scented with rose petals and myrrh, the same ritual she performed before meeting Caesar for the first time, before sailing to Antony in that golden barge that made the river shine like molten metal. Her hands, once steady enough to guide the fate of nations, now tremble slightly as she applies kohl around her eyes. But her gaze in the polished bronze mirror remains unwavering. The asp arrives hidden in a basket of fresh figs, its scales dark as midnight against the purple fruit. This is no random choice. The cobra has been sacred to Egyptian royalty for 3,000 years, protector of pharaohs in life and death. As Cleopatra lifts the serpent, she whispers a prayer to Isis. The snake's eyes are small black jewels that reflect nothing. It coils around her wrist like living jewelry. Iris weeps quietly in the corner, but Charmian stands straight-backed beside her queen. They understand what history will remember, not just how Cleopatra died, but how she chose to die, with dignity intact, with royal blood still flowing through veins that refuse to bow to Rome. The afternoon sun slants lower through the windows, casting long shadows across marble floors, worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. She thinks of her children, Caesarion, somewhere in hiding, carrying his father's name, and her hopes. Cleopatra Selene, Alexander Helios, Ptolemy Philadelphus. Their names like poetry, their futures uncertain, but they'll grow up knowing their mother died a pharaoh, not a prisoner. That matters more than gold or armies ever could. The asp moves slowly across her palm, tongue flicking against warm skin. The bite comes swiftly, not painful, more like a whisper of fire spreading through her arm. Cleopatra settles back against silk cushions, arranging her robes so she'll be found as she lived, every detail perfect, every symbol in place. The uraeus crown sits heavy on her forehead, gold serpent matching the living one that sealed her fate. Her breathing slows. The room grows warm and distant. Charmian adjusts the crown one final time, straightening the golden cobra so it catches the light just right. Iraz closes her queen's eyes gently, fingers soft as moth wings. Outside, Alexandria continues its daily rhythm, merchants calling prices, children playing in dusty streets, fishermen hauling nets from the harbor. But inside this chamber, an era ends. The last pharaoh breathes no more. When the Romans finally break down the doors, they find three women arranged like sleeping princesses from an ancient tale. Cleopatra rests on her golden couch, crown still gleaming, lips curved in the faintest smile. Iris lies at her feet. Charmian, barely alive, straightens the diadem once more before the poison claims her too. Octavian stares at the scene, cheated of his triumph. News spreads through Alexandria like wildfire. In the great library, scholars set down their scrolls. In the marketplace, vendors fall silent. Along the harbor, sailors stop their work and turn toward the palace. The woman who spoke 9 languages, who sailed the Nile in ships covered with silver, who made Roman generals weep with longing, is gone. But somehow, the city feels her presence more strongly than ever. They say the asp vanished after the bite, slipping away like a shadow. Some claim it returned to the sacred pools beneath the temple of Isis. Others believe it transformed into pure starlight and rejoined the constellation Draco, the celestial serpent that guards the northern sky. What matters is this: Cleopatra chose her death as carefully as she chose her lovers, with purpose, with meaning. Octavian orders her body embalmed with all royal honors. Even in victory, he recognizes greatness. She's buried beside Mark Antony in a tomb somewhere in Alexandria, the exact location lost to time, like so many secrets of the ancient world. But her story survives, written in Greek and Latin, carved in stone, whispered through generations of dreamers who understand that some spirits refuse to be conquered. Centuries pass, Rome falls, new empires rise and crumble, but travelers still come to Alexandria, searching for traces of the woman who loved so fiercely and ruled so brilliantly that her name became legend. They find her in broken statues, in papyrus fragments that smell of sand and roses, in the way morning light strikes the harbor where her golden barges once sailed. Shakespeare writes her story. Hollywood puts her on silver screens. Historians debate her beauty, her intelligence, her political genius. But they all agree on this: she was the last true pharaoh, the final guardian of a civilization that built pyramids and mapped the stars. In choosing death over dishonor, she became immortal. The asp that ended her life became the symbol of her eternal power. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, remember Cleopatra not as she died, but as she lived. Bold enough to meet Caesar, clever enough to enchant Antony, proud enough to die a queen. Her story ends here, but her spirit lives on in everyone who refuses to let others write their final chapter. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones we choose ourselves. Rest well. Death silenced Cleopatra's voice, but it couldn't erase what she'd built. In the marble corridors where Caesar once walked, in the children who carried her blood, in the stories that would outlive empires, her legacy began its own quiet revolution. Sometimes the most powerful rulers are remembered not for how they died, but for what refused to die with them. Tonight, we follow those echoes through time. 3 of her children survived that final brutal summer in Alexandria. Caesarion, gone, but the twins she bore with Mark Antony, Alexander Helios, and Cleopatra Selene, they were marched through Rome's streets as prisoners, then raised in the household of Octavia. The irony cuts deep. Antony's former wife became mother to his children. History loves its cruel symmetries. Young Cleopatra Selene grew up speaking Latin instead of Greek, but something of her mother's fire never dimmed. At 20, she married Juba II of Numidia. Their kingdom flourished under her influence. She minted coins bearing her own image, founded libraries, patronized artists. In North Africa, 700 miles from Alexandria, Cleopatra's daughter quietly rebuilt what Rome had tried to destroy. The Romans who knew her personally, they told different stories than the history books. Plutarch wrote that she was charming, not conventionally beautiful. Her voice was like music, switching between 9 languages without effort. She could discuss philosophy with scholars, then debate taxation with merchants. Intelligence, they said, was her true seduction, power wrapped in curiosity and genuine warmth. But official Roman histories painted her as something else entirely. The temptress who corrupted noble men, the foreign queen who threatened civilization itself. Horace called her a mad queen, plotting destruction against the capital. Every political triumph became manipulation. Every alliance became seduction. They needed her to be a monster because admitting her brilliance meant admitting Rome's vulnerability. Medieval chroniclers inherited these Roman lies and made them worse. She became a figure of biblical warning, the harlot of Babylon reborn. Christian monks copying manuscripts added moral commentary where none existed. By the 13th century, she was pure legend, disconnected from the woman who once calculated grain shipments and negotiated trade agreements in 4 different languages simultaneously. Then came the Renaissance, and suddenly everyone wanted to reimagine her. Painters gave her pale European skin and golden hair. Writers made her a tragic romantic heroine. In 1540, Jodelle's play portrayed her as torn between love and duty. She wasn't calculating anymore, just passionate, beautiful in her suffering. The transformation was almost complete. The queen had become a queen of hearts. Shakespeare sealed her fate in 1607. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. His Cleopatra was magnetic, mercurial, tragic. She died for love, not politics. Audiences wept for her. The woman who once controlled Mediterranean trade routes became a symbol of romantic doom, beautiful poetry built on fundamental misunderstanding. But poetry has its own power, its own truth. Hollywood finished what Shakespeare started. Elizabeth Taylor's violet eyes, the golden barges, the pearl dissolved in wine. $65 million spent recreating a fantasy. The real Cleopatra would have laughed at the budget. She once funded an entire army for less. But the myth was complete now. Seductress, beauty, tragic lover, the political genius had vanished entirely beneath layers of romantic paint. Modern archaeology tells a different story. In Alexandria's harbor, Divers find granite columns, marble sphinxes, the actual foundation stones of her palace complex. The buildings were massive, practical, built for governing an empire, not staging romantic dramas. Storage rooms for grain reserves, workshops for papyrus production, libraries containing tax records alongside poetry. This was a working palace, a bureaucratic center. Her coins survive thousands of them. The images show a strong featured woman with a prominent nose and intelligent eyes. Not Hollywood beautiful, but commanding, regal. The inscriptions emphasize her learning, her divine lineage, her role as pharaoh, never her physical appeal. Her own propaganda focused on competence. She wanted to be remembered as capable, not captivating. History had other plans, but here's what survives beyond the myths: her methods, the way she studied her opponents before negotiations, how she adapted her approach to each culture she encountered. Romans got military displays, Egyptians got religious ceremonies, Jews got philosophical discussions. She spoke to people in the language they understood, literally and figuratively. Modern diplomats still study her techniques. Her economic innovations lasted centuries. The trade routes she established, the agricultural reforms that doubled Egypt's wheat production, the currency stabilization that made Alexandria the financial center of the Mediterranean. Long after her death, merchants still used her shipping schedules, farmers still followed her crop rotation systems. Practical genius disguised as royal glamour. Walk through Alexandria today, and the echoes are everywhere. In the library that bears her ancient library's name, in the harbor where her palace foundations still rest beneath 20 feet of water, in the museum displaying her coins, her pottery, fragments of her world. Tourists come looking for romance. Archaeologists find evidence of remarkable administrative skill instead. Maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that she died for love, but that love became her only story. The woman who spoke 9 languages became known for beauty. The ruler who doubled her kingdom's wealth became famous for spending money on luxury. The strategist who nearly changed world history became remembered as a victim of her own passions. But late at night, when Alexandria's streets empty and the Mediterranean grows calm, you can almost hear her. The rustle of papyrus scrolls, the soft scratch of reed pens calculating tomorrow's grain shipments, the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. History tried to silence her voice. 2,000 years later, it still echoes, still instructs, still inspires. Here we are, at the end of her story. Cleopatra VII Philopator, the last pharaoh of Egypt. History remembers her as many things: seductress, manipulator, political mastermind. But tonight, as we close this chapter, let's see her as she truly was. A woman who understood power in ways that would make modern politicians blush. She knew something that took the world centuries to learn: that love and politics were never separate games. Picture her in those final months in Alexandria, 39 years old, mother to 4 children, queen of the richest kingdom on earth, now crumbling at the edges. She wasn't the beauty poets claimed archaeological evidence suggests. She was rather ordinary looking. But her voice, contemporary accounts describe it as mesmerizing. She spoke 9 languages fluently. Intelligence was her true weapon. Always had been, always would be. When she first met Julius Caesar, she was 21. He was 52. The age gap that scandalized Rome was actually strategic brilliance. She needed an ally who commanded legions. He needed Egypt's grain shipments. What looked like romance was really two master chess players, recognizing each other across the board. Their affair lasted 3 years, long enough to secure her throne and give her a son who would carry Caesar's name. After Caesar's assassination, she waited, watched, calculated. Mark Antony was younger than Caesar, more passionate, easier to read. When she finally met him at Tarsus, arriving on that golden barge dressed as Aphrodite, it wasn't seduction, it was theater, political performance art. She knew exactly what kind of man he was, exactly what he wanted to see, and she gave him a goddess. Their relationship lasted 11 years. 11 years of genuine partnership between two people who understood power. They had 3 children together. They planned an empire that would stretch from Egypt to Britain. For a moment, just a moment, it almost worked. But Octavian was waiting, patient as a spider, and when he struck at Octavian, their world collapsed in a single afternoon. What strikes me most about Cleopatra isn't the legend, it's how familiar her struggles feel. She was a working mother trying to protect her children's future, a leader navigating impossible political pressures, a woman in a world run by men, using every advantage she could find. Her bedroom wasn't just where she slept, it was her war room, her negotiation table, her sanctuary. Modern women recognize something in her story, the way she had to be twice as smart to get half the credit, how she used her femininity as armor in a world that would have destroyed her otherwise. She never apologized for her ambition, never made herself smaller to make men comfortable. In boardrooms today, women still deploy versions of her strategies, charm backed by absolute competence. Her death scene was her final performance, August 30th, 30 BCE. Octavian's soldiers found her on her golden bed, dressed in royal regalia, already gone. The asp bite, probably apocryphal, more likely poison, but she chose how her story would end. Even in death, she refused to be anyone's trophy. She died a pharaoh, the last pharaoh. That was the point. Octavian had her son Caesarion executed. Harsh, but understandable from his perspective. The boy carried Caesar's name, posed a future threat. Her other children lived. Cleopatra Selene eventually became Queen of Mauritania. The bloodline continued. Cleopatra's great gamble, using love as a political weapon, partially succeeded. Some of her children survived to build their own kingdoms. What were her bedroom secrets? Really, not the perfumes or silk sheets that Hollywood imagines. Her secret was understanding that intimacy creates obligation, that shared vulnerability becomes mutual leverage. She didn't just sleep with powerful men, she made them need her counsel, crave her intelligence, depend on her networks. She turned desire into dependency, longing into loyalty. She spoke to Caesar in Latin, Antony in Greek, her children in Egyptian. She read philosophy, mathematics, rhetoric. Her library in Alexandria held 400,000 scrolls. When Roman senators whispered about her dangerous influence, they weren't talking about her beauty, they feared her mind. A woman who could debate Aristotle and negotiate grain prices in the same afternoon was genuinely threatening to their world order. Think about her legacy differently now. Not the Hollywood siren draped in gold, but the CEO who inherited a failing company at 21 and kept it profitable for 2 decades. She navigated civil wars, famines, political upheavals. Egypt prospered under her rule. The kingdom that had survived 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule died with her, not from internal weakness, but from external force. Her story echoes in every woman who's ever used charm to get into a room where she wasn't welcome. then proved she deserved to be there. Every mother who's protected her children through impossible circumstances. Every leader who's had to be simultaneously strong and feminine, brilliant and approachable. Cleopatra's bedroom secrets were really life secrets: adaptation, intelligence, ruthless pragmatism wrapped in silk. As her story fades into history, what lingers? Not the scandals or the suicide, but the image of a woman who refused to be diminished, who turned limitation into weapon, constraint into creativity. She ruled for 21 years in an era when most queens were decorative. She made herself indispensable to the most powerful men alive. That's not seduction, that's mastery. So we bid farewell to Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the devoted mother, the brilliant strategist who almost changed the course of Western civilization. Her bedroom held more than passion. It held the dreams of an empire, the fears of a mother, the calculations of a queen who knew she was playing for everything. History belongs to the winners, but sometimes the losers leave better stories. Sleep well tonight, knowing that somewhere in the sands of Egypt, archaeologists are still uncovering fragments of her world, pottery shards that once held her perfume, coins bearing her profile, papyrus scrolls with her seal. Cleopatra's true secret wasn't what happened in her bedroom. It was her understanding that power, like love, is about making yourself unforgettable. She succeeded. 2,000 years later, we're still talking